Welcome back to the Epic Investor Podcast, where today we're diving into the first C in the Succeed model, core teams that make or break your deal. But first, I'm Rich Jarvis with Epic Capital Funds, where we help people like you learn how to use private equity and real estate investing to achieve freedom of purpose. I'm joined with Jason Morris, my partner in Impact Equity Partners, our private equity division. So let's get started. When I was thinking of core teams, we've got a fantastic core team. I absolutely love it. But it was interesting. The first analogy that I came up with was water skiing. And if you think about it, I'm a slalom skier. I love skiing. And in fact, when I met my wife, it was my bed, my skis, or my ski actually as a slalom ski, and then my scriptures. In that order. I mean, that's just how it was. Right next to my bed. And there's just something magical about being out there on the lake, crack it on. No one else is out there. It's just pure glass, and just that. It's just an amazing feeling. It's like this freedom that just comes. And I was thinking, how is water skiing a team sport? Well, if you aren't in sync with the driver, things just don't turn. You can't get into that flow. And one experience I had, there was a driver, I'm not going to mention who it is. You may or may not know them. Ultimately, the boat has to go straight regardless. So you can do your slalom. And if the boat turns, you can't go. So you have to, change and get set up again. And the worst thing you can possibly do is turn the boat or turn when the boat's turning. Like if I'm out and I'm doing a cut, and the boat turns, either I get a ton of slack and then you get your arms ripped off, or you get pulled out of your skis. And this one time, it was just, I was laying down, just feeling that flow. And the driver turned, like I was on the left side of the boat. So I was coming this way, right? Or to my left. And the boat turned right. At the same time, I got to the apex of that turn. And the end result was about 3 broken ribs. I mean, it was extremely painful to hit like that hard. I mean, when you're going across the wakes, you can get up to 70 miles an hour.
I've got to interject really quick because I don't know if you've seen these guys. The whole world right now is crazed about AI and, the takeover of AI, and it's going to replace people and teams are going to shrink. And when you told me about even a team of 2, I've seen those controllers that skiers can wear on their arms where they can control the boat. And I've seen so many bad situations with those things. Like they think they have it under control and, they fall or the battery dies and the boat goes away. So even under AI and all this really cool technology that's fun and exciting, you still have to have like the dependable team, right? The core people that you can lean on when you got to get in the trench.
And even if you have the right people, it just has to be in sync. Everyone needs to be understanding their role and delivering on that role. There's a quote, it's an African proverb. It says, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. And there's some truth to it. Sometimes people say, well, it just takes too long to get the team together. I might as well just do it myself. That kind of feel. And I think we need to talk about that. The other one is Michael Jordan. You may have heard this one. Talent wins games, but teamwork and intelligence wins championships. So that's what we're going to talk about today is just, the championship of private equity, the championship of good real estate projects. How do we ensure that we're going to win, right? But I want to focus on that first C in our Epic Succeed model. For those that don't know, the Succeed model stands for structure, underwriting, core teams, capital stack, exit strategy, execution, and due diligence. So right now, I'm just going to focus on that first C, the core teams that make or break the deal. I think there's been, I don't know how many countless leadership or management books about getting the right people in the right seats, on the bus, Jim Collins, Good to Great, all of those concepts. And it's real. But let's start with the EOS. And one of the first things that you do is get your organizational chart together. And if you're a team of one, you create this organizational chart of all of the roles that need to be done, and your name is in each one, right?
But how powerful is that imagery when someone can go through that for the first time and go, yeah, I'm in a startup and I'm doing this, but look how many hats I'm wearing. And I think that once you put the imagery on paper and you see the 12 seats in this business, I think that the trajectory of their efforts changes a little bit too. How can I stabilize so that I can start putting seats in those, or butts in those seats?
Yeah. And it's the right people in those right seats, right? And that's where what's called delegate and elevate. When you start focusing on the 20% of effort that you make throughout your week drives 80% of the results. So if you can take the 80% of the stuff you're doing and get it off your plate, how much more impactful is your time to the business when you can do it that way? So that's really what about, getting the right people in the right seats, but assigning team members to things that, number one, they're very good at. They've got skills, their strengths in that area, and they're passionate about. They enjoy doing what they're doing. One of the indicators for procrastination to me is that's probably something I should delegate. Because if I keep procrastinating it, it's probably because either I'm not very good at it, I don't really know what to do, got to think through it a little bit, and so it kind of gets pushed off. Versus the things that I'm so excited to do, I can't wait, and that usually gets done right out of the gate, right? I was serving in the church, a volunteer organization, right? And I was over a group, and part of the initiative in the group would be to go out and, at the time we called it home teaching or ministering to those people. And I put this team together to make sure that all of it happened. And we struggled, just looking at the numbers, how many people did you actually go and spend time with, how much you were able to impact. And the numbers were so low. I just couldn't figure it out. And I just got this impression I needed to get different people in those seats. I got two other individuals in that were very much aligned with our vision of what we wanted to do, but they executed. They were really good at what they did. And number-wise, we went from, maybe I would say 30% being effective to over 95. And just the only thing that changed was getting the right people in the right seats in what we were doing.
You brought up a spiritual side, through church, and I think there's opportunities in the family life. I think there's plenty of examples in business. Funny enough, I thought of softball. I enjoy playing competitive softball. And if you've got somebody who's just super excited about being there and he wants to be a pitcher and he just doesn't pitch, you got the wrong, that's an obvious one, right? You got the wrong seat. You got the wrong person in the seat on that one, and the whole team suffers as a result. I've had lots of experience in business where we've got the wrong person doing a certain project or a certain role. And in my experience, I've inherited teams. We go in under an acquisition and we have to assess who does what. Right now, we're looking at the organizational chart and we're identifying who's responsible for these key categories and departments. And I remember a time we bought a business, and typically those first 90 days, there's just a whole lot going on. You're drinking from like 19 fire hoses. But one of those is assessing your team. And there was a bookkeeper that was in place. And you would assume, buying a company, hey, there's obviously a reason that the person hired you to be in that role. So we're just going to leave you right there. A couple weeks go by and you're like, I think I'm going to spend some time watching and observing, how you do what you do. And I remember this particular case. I went in with my book, and because I was new, I could come in under the guise of, hey, I'm just here to understand how you operate, how you came to be in this position, how long you've been here, things like that. And I remember after about a 15-minute conversation with this great young lady that bookkeeping was just not her role. And I learned further that she was hired because the owner was her friend and she just wanted to give her a job. Now, you, Rich, know, and most people listening understand the important role that the bookkeeper has to the success of the business, because of the power, the information that it feeds you as the owner is how you make every single decision. And so if that bookkeeper position is off in the slightest, it could have massive repercussions. And so we had to make a change at that bookkeeper position. We were able to repurpose her. We could, move her into another seat because we simply asked the question, what would you like to do? What would you enjoy doing here? Where would you like to be involved? And obviously it was a win-win for everybody because she was more fulfilled and more happy when we found that, obviously she wasn't the right seat. She wasn't in the right seat at that given time. So lots of experiences, man. And it's so funny to me. I think everybody says the same thing. Why didn't we do that sooner? Why didn't we make that change sooner?
The whole point of having good core teams, with the projects in real estate, for example, I think that's one of the most important pieces of the entire Succeed model. And because you can structure things a number of different ways. You can have a really good project, but if you have a dysfunctional team, that project is doomed to fail. You can have a mediocre project, but with the right team, you can actually get through at far better than what's expected. Everyone has their expertise in their area. And so to apply that expertise across the board, a lot of times I see investors that are wanting to get involved in real estate investing, for example, and they've had fantastically successful careers. Dentists, doctors, surgeons. They're very smart. They know their industries extremely well. They're experts in those. And for some reason, it's this idea that if you're an expert in one industry, that carries over and you're an expert in anything else you want to do. And you can get there, but understanding that industry expertise is powerful. It enables you to navigate challenges and capitalize on opportunities that others miss, that don't have that expertise in that realm. And so when I think of core teams, it's really pulling all of the pieces together, the experts that are really good in those lanes of where they perform at, and creating this synergy across the team that you can do so much more than you could possibly do individually.
Can I make another barbecue example?
Heck yeah. Is there any time you can't make a barbecue analogy?
My buddies and I, we were living in Washington and we were getting ready to go to our first competition, which we ended up winning, by the way. We ended up winning with a first place blue ribbon. But I remember that we were practicing for that competition, which is just terrible, right? Practicing every weekend, cooking steak and, trying to perfect it. I remember asking the question, we need somebody to come in and taste this so that they can tell us if they like it. Because we know that our wives are going to love it. We know we love it. Our kids, maybe they don't know any different, but we need like somebody who understands what they're doing. So we started naming people we knew in the community. And the comment would go like, is he a foodie? Or like, does he appreciate good food? Or is he a backyard hobby barbecue guy? And it eventually, and not that those are bad, right? You're just identifying what lane they're in, right? And we identified actually two people in the community that one was a former barbecue competition person, like he competed all the time. The other owned a restaurant. And we were like, we want both of them at least, right? Let's get them and then let's get a few other people. And we want 5 people just to taste this to tell us if we're headed in the right direction. So it aligns well with what we're talking about, and from the standpoint of you don't want to ask, for example, somebody who owns a fruit smoothie stand, will you come taste this ribeye steak and tell me if we've just nailed it, right? They're probably excellent when it comes to the blending of fruits and certain flavors, right? I can totally appreciate, that desire. And yet I think sometimes we hang our hat on, hey, they're a successful businessman in the roofing game, and he says that, my new fence company is going to kill it. I'm off to the races. And it feels good to hear good things, and it's always, in the positive, but we've got to make sure that we've got those right core people in place that we're talking to.
The synergy that is created when you have those core teams firing on all cylinders. You know what it's like when you have this A team, right? And all of the positions are just dialed in and people are very good at those positions, right? The synergy in real estate or business acquisitions is very similar. For example, when the markets are moving and it's hot and everyone wants in and wants to buy. And there's this, we're high on the greed index. Everyone wants to participate because everyone's making money and there's a lot of transactions going, right? That's a different environment than when everyone pulls back and there's scarcity and there's not really much capital available to do a project. Well, in the last couple of years, that it has shifted from the COVID area where things were just booming. I mean, there's so much transaction volume and prices were skyrocketing. And then we went through, the last couple of years where there was a tightening of the market. Banks were pulling back, lenders pulling back, and so it became much more difficult to get not only projects to pencil at the table, but once you got them penciled to capitalize on them. It's very difficult to manage, those obstacles by yourself because you don't have all of the expertise across the full life cycle of a business or a real estate project necessarily. Sometimes you can, but when you combine expertise in the industry and create a synergy, we did this with a partnership, and in the last 2 years, from 2023 to 2025, when capital markets were tight, um, with these guys, we still were able to capitalize over $500 million in residential communities throughout the Intermountain West, when other ones were drying up and not being able to fund anything. I attribute that success to the synergy created to having the right people in the right lanes doing, what they're really good at and pulling it all together.
Having the right person's great, right? But in order to capitalize in an area where other people are drying up, you would attribute that to the knowledge? Would you attribute it to the network? Like the reach that they had, or what makes that synergy so impenetrable?
That's the whole point. Doing it alone, you don't have all. You might have a network, you might have some expertise on the finance side, but when you pull in others on your team that are really good at the different lanes, like the builder, the developer, getting the land, and their ties to the, financial markets, and putting your piece together, it enables a different level of success than if you're just trying to plow ahead alone and not essentially you have blinders on. You don't know what you don't know.
Yeah. And so is this a success from the standpoint of executing the project, but also a success from the standpoint of appealing to investors who can see the advisory board that's around there because of that experience on all fronts?
Yes, it's all of those things. It creates a momentum. Momentum is something very powerful, especially when things start pulling back and you have scarcity, building those small wins on top of each other, but doing it as a team where you can capitalize, and no pun intended, on all of those pieces and get it through the end of the row. But it's not just working together in that synergy and having the right people in the right seats. It's also a mindset. There's a difference between a fixed mindset and a growth mindset. And, a fixed mindset views intelligence or abilities and talents as inherently stable or unchangeable. You're inherently talented in this area, and that's just how it is. There's not a lot of movement, right? Whereas a growth mindset, views intelligence, abilities, and talents as learnable and capable of improvement. So those are two completely different frameworks of how the worldview is internalized. There's her name's Carol Dweck, Stanford Research, first in 2006 and updated in 2023. But they showed that the growth mindset, individuals that reframe stress and challenge reduce cortisol spikes by over 27% and boost dopamine during problem solving.
It's a superpower.
What that means is when life gets stressful, right? Those with a fixed mindset, those challenges come through and it's almost unbearable because it's fixed. There's nothing that they can do to change their outcome or change how their approach is versus that growth mindset. When challenges are, are presented or obstacles, they're viewed as opportunities to learn and grow and to change. And it creates two different outcomes completely. And I think mindset had a huge part in the success, of creating that synergy with those teams.
You're able to approach a situation so much better when your mind is right. And I want to be careful how I say your mind is right, but the mindset of kind of like Jocko Willink, when, you didn't get the promotion, good, more time to learn, right? Or you didn't get the budget that you were looking for, good, time to like roll up the sleeves and figure out a new solution. And when you approach it from the standpoint that this is a learning opportunity or a challenge, I mean, you actually have a better attitude about it. Yeah, you're probably way more humble through it, but you can actually solve a problem better in that mind frame than if you're, feeling like the victim or feeling like it's never fair, or you can't really approach problem solving, from the negative. It just doesn't work. So this is a great study. I'm going to look into that.
Yeah, and there's another one called the Oz principle that it's called below the line thinking. Where essentially it's victimhood. It's everything that's happening is due to outside things that you can't control. There's nothing you can do to change your outcome. It's that type of mindset, right, or attitude. Whereas seeing something, owning it, solving it, and doing it is a completely different mindset than, well, it's just not my job.
That's so powerful. Like, how do you, I don't want to go off on a tangent here, but how do you teach that? How do you teach mindset to somebody who, that can't be an intangible, can it?
Well, it goes back to the fundamental definition of fixed versus growth mindset. A fixed mindset by nature assumes that it's not learnable or changeable on your mindset, versus a growth mindset says, yeah, I can work on that and I can change. So Harvard Business School came out with a study or insights. There was an article by Catherine Cole, and they just described just the differences. What is a fixed mindset versus a growth mindset? And examples of that would be a fixed mindset avoids challenges, whereas a growth mindset views challenges as opportunities. So when we go through a market cycle, we call it, embracing the cycle, meaning that throughout history, there's always ups and downs. The market cycle evolves and changes. That is a constant. Change will always happen. And those that can embrace that the cycle is happening can get through that and find opportunities on each part of the cycle, versus those that say the market's crashing, the values are plummeting, there's nothing I can do. I just need to sell everything and lose it all. I mean, that there's a different mindset in that approach, and embracing the cycle, I think, makes a big difference.
Well, I'm thinking of one of the first times when you and I were talking, I was asking you specifics about real estate and investing. And you said, yeah, one of our targets is when people start running, we run uphill. When people go one way, we like to go right at it. We lean into it and, embrace the suck, if you will, even though your standpoint isn't that it sucks, right? It's just that you embrace the situation and you run uphill and you run into it rather than, running away from a problem, which I believe you'd call a fixed mindset, right? Oh, there's nothing more here, we're out, instead of embracing it and learning to pivot with it.
I remember we were looking at moving, and it was at a time in my career or life that was particularly hard. And he said, well, are you moving to something or are you moving away from something? And I said, no, I'm moving towards this. This is where I want to be. And he goes, good, because if you're trying to move away from something, you'll never get there. You will always be running away from something.
I love that. I think that's deep. I mean, that speaks to character, I think, of the kind of person that you're becoming.
Well, Harvard Business Review goes on and talks about, so the fixed mindset doesn't accept failures. And the growth mindset embraces constructive feedback. They look at failure as, opportunities to learn and grow and to do something different again. And what better way to do another try, because you now have all this much more experience that second time or third time or 1,000th time, whatever it is. It's just a different mindset.
Going back to core teams, right, and having the right people in your corner, right seats on the bus. versus those, perhaps those seats that need to be adjusted or moved or transitioned. And, you want to create an environment like in a business environment. You want to create an environment where people are not afraid to fail. And what I mean by that is that they're not afraid to try something. They're not afraid to, push the norm a little bit. They're not afraid to try a different approach or a different angle. Being okay with quote unquote failing, right? Like, hey, we didn't hit our target. But if you have the right core people and you have the right mindsets at that table, you can say, great, where did we miss and why did we miss? And now we're smarter for it. So we're going to be better on the, on the next attempt. And even if you fail on the next attempt, you're better than you were last week. And you continue to go through this failed, cycle until you arrive at this success, right? One of my favorite pictures of success is this little tiny, ice glacier, but beneath the water is, the massive, the massive piece of ice that, no one sees, right? And no one sees the years of work or the nights that you didn't sleep or, all of the aches and pains of growth. They only see the very top. And I think this is where a lot of people miss opportunity to embrace the growth mindset, specifically in the business world, but you can take it any way you want in family and in faith and at work. If you don't have an environment where failure is okay, where it's embraced, it's championed, you're not going to grow. But I want to highlight again that if it's the wrong people, for example, I had a company where I would walk in and say, guys, it's okay to fail. We're going to be fine. We need to learn from it and move on. But then the wrong people would just kind of sit there and play on their phones like, oh, it's okay to fail. I missed my target. I missed my budget. But they didn't try, right? It was not the right mindset, not the right seat on the bus, not the right group at the table. So I feel like when you've got the right people, you don't really look at it as failure. It is, what's the next challenge and how do we band together to overcome it?
When you were telling something came to mind, that movie Apollo 13, where Houston says failure is not an option. Well, what's interesting is in that whole context, everything they were experiencing was because of failures. So there's a difference between outcomes, meaning failure as an outcome, versus failure along the way that you need to change so you can improve what the outcomes truly will be.
One of the things EOS does so well, and we tried to create this on our own before I really became familiar with EOS, where we'd create KPIs, create some accountability charts. People would report weekly on them. EOS does a really good job of taking the human side of wanting to focus on the failure and wanting to just whine and gripe and beat it to death and focus on the failure, where we can go through a level 10 meeting and we can say, yeah, my target was 10 and I got to 7. And you can ask, well, what happened? And we can say, I didn't have enough appointments. Great, let's discuss that later, right? IDS it and put it to the later into the meeting. We're simply reporting on what the objective was and if we hit it or missed it. And we're not indulging in the woe is me, and we're not living in the failure, right? We don't even call it a failure. And I remember previously we would try to find different words to beat the human psyche, right? It's not a failure, it's a challenge. It's not a problem, it's a challenge. And what did we learn from this instead of whose fault was it and who needs to be hung out to dry for it? Like, those are cancerous moments that can be overcome if the right leader is managing and maneuvering through that discussion. And to your point previously, the synergies of the people at the table can have a way better outcome of how we're going to solve this problem or solve this issue instead of just living in victimville.
Love that. A couple other points that article made was, talent is static versus learns and grows from failures. And one of the last points that Catherine Cole made was shies away from unfamiliar things versus believes in skills development, which I thought was really interesting. So we've gone through, the concept of of core teams, right? The A team, getting the right people on the right seats. We're going deep in industry experience, which with each of those areas. Each team member has their expertise that they bring, and they do very well in those lanes. And it's about getting those lanes to work together to make something so much more than individually is what you're capable of. And then wrapping that all with the right mindset, a growth mindset, it's changeable, that you can improve and develop. The last, I think, is the commitment. You have accountability, that's one thing, but this is a commitment. It's a stewardship, right? When you have a team that looks at their role as a stewardship versus just a job they get paid for, there's something that's just different. Part of that stewardship is the commitment to stakeholders. Who are the ones that are impacted by these projects that we're doing? You have, obviously the investors. So what's the commitment to protect them and at all costs? And I think the core teams that recognize that long-term relationships and that commitment is far more important than any one transaction. And when you get out of the transactional nature of an individual project and expand into that stewardship and commitment, and know that you do right by these projects, even if it's you don't on the sponsor side, you don't make as much because you're protecting those investors. What's going to happen? You're going to be able to do so much more in volume at that point.
Amen. I think that when you understand the why and then you identify those deep purposes as part of the why, it really kind of makes things easy. We talked a lot about making these decisions and how sometimes it's really hard to make some of those decisions quickly. And I find that it's actually the opposite. I think the decision is pretty simple. I think executing it is the hard part. It's the emotional side of that equation, right? We already know what has to be done. Now doing it and everything that is involved in it seems to be the harder part. But if you know why, and you're guided and driven by that why, by principle and discipline, you've got your checkpoints already built into that, and it makes protecting those involved that much easier. All the stakeholders. Not just the investors, but all the stakeholders, right? The families that are associated with the employees that you have stewardship over. And when there's that deep purpose, man, and coupled with the right people at the seats, man, you've got something really special.
Yeah. And that's what a core team really is all about. And one of the conversations I loved, having with you, behind the scenes when we're looking at projects, it's, the contingencies and the willingness to say, look, if this doesn't perform as we expect it will perform, what are we willing to do on our side to make it right? Another example of that, one of our other partnerships on the real estate side, we've had those conversations where, things weren't going well. We had these pro formas built and say, no, there's a difference between a target and, laying that expectation and internally what we think we're going to do, right? So we have this target that we share with investors, but internally, the reason we're comfortable with that target is because we know we can far outperform it. And as things change, go up and down, or even if it falls below that target, I love that the teams that we've been part of are willing to say, okay, then we will change the structure to make sure that things are made right for a long-term relationship with these groups. And so I love that. Just in closing, in the high-stakes world of real estate and private equity, right? Core teams are the ultimate deal makers or deal breakers. They are the foundation that determines whether your deal survives contact with first reality, right? Or soars far beyond it. As the epic investor, don't leave your legacy to chance. Get the right people in the right seats, and achieving unstoppable results becomes really the norm. Make that the floor, right? Like and subscribe, send us comments, and reach out. We would love to hear your story. Let's be epic together. And until next time, we'll see you there.